There was a moment in American history when owning money became a crime. Not counterfeiting, not fraud, simply holding the wrong kind of money. Most Americans hear that and instinctively think that could never happen today. We live in a modern economy, strong institutions, clear laws. Things like that belong to black and white history books, not real life. But history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. And when you study the rhyme carefully, something unsettling appears. The same pressures, the same incentives, the same quiet panic inside the financial system. Back then, the government didn't seize wealth because it wanted to. It did it because it believed it had no other choice. The system was breaking, confidence was collapsing, and drastic moves suddenly felt necessary. That's the part most people miss. Because today, the warning signs are flashing again, not loudly, not all at once, but in familiar, dangerous ways. To understand what's coming next, you first need to understand what already happened. In 1933, the United States was not facing a normal recession. It was living through the Great Depression. Banks were failing by the thousands. Lines formed outside branch doors as people rushed to pull out whatever savings they had left. Trust in the financial system was collapsing in real time, and fear was spreading faster than facts. When Franklin D. Roosevelt took office, the situation was already unstable. The dollar was still tied to gold, which meant people could legally exchange paper money for physical gold. As panic grew, Americans did exactly that. They demanded gold. And the government quickly realized a problem. If everyone converted dollars into gold, the system would break completely. So in April of 1933, Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6010-2. The order was direct and uncompromising. Americans were given just 26 days to surrender their gold coins, gold bullion, and gold certificates to the Federal Reserve. In return, they would receive paper dollars at a fixed price set by the government. Refusal was not symbolic. It carried severe consequences. Violators faced massive fines and the possibility of years in prison. Overnight, an asset that families had saved for generations was no longer a form of security. It was illegal to own. There were small exemptions: gold jewelry, certain industrial uses, rare coins labeled as collectibles. These weren't accidents. They created narrow escape routes that favored insiders and specialists, while ordinary savers had none. The result was simple and brutal. Law-abiding citizens became criminals on paper, not because they broke the law, but because the law moved beneath their feet. But the real story isn't the confiscation, it's what happened next. When Americans turned in their gold in 1933, they were paid exactly what the law promised. The government set the price at $20.67 per ounce. That number wasn't debated, it wasn't negotiated, it was fixed. And because gold ownership had just been criminalized, there was no choice involved. You didn't sell because you wanted to. You sold because you were required to. At the time, most people believed the transaction was fair. After all, the government paid in full, in dollars, at the official rate. On paper, nothing was stolen. But what happened next revealed the real mechanics of the decision. Just 9 months later, in early 1934, the government changed the rules again. Through new legislation, the official price of gold was raised from $20.67 an ounce to $35 an ounce. The gold itself didn't change. The economy didn't suddenly improve. Only the number attached to gold was rewritten. Think about what that means in simple terms. You were forced to sell gold at one price. Then, almost immediately, that same gold was declared far more valuable. The difference didn't go back to you. It stayed with the government. Legally, this wasn't called theft. It followed the law. It passed through Congress. It was documented, justified, and enforced. But economically, the outcome was clear. The purchasing power of the dollars Americans received was quietly reduced, while the value of the gold they surrendered was quietly increased. This wasn't a market transaction driven by supply and demand. It was a transfer created by policy. Wealth didn't disappear. It moved, and it moved in only one direction. This wasn't a one-time decision. It followed a pattern. When you step back from the details, the 1933 gold confiscation stops looking like a unique event. It begins to look like a process, one that has repeated across countries, decades, and political systems. Not because governments copy each other, but because they respond to pressure in predictable ways. The first stage is always a crisis. Gold is never restricted during calm, stable periods. It happens when the system is already under stress. Banking failures, debt overload, collapsing confidence, or war. Crisis creates urgency, and urgency creates public acceptance of actions that would otherwise be unthinkable. The second stage is criminalizing or restricting ownership. Governments rarely ask politely, they redefine the rules. What was legal yesterday becomes illegal today. Gold isn't framed as savings anymore. It's framed as hoarding, speculation, or a threat to stability. Once the narrative changes, enforcement becomes easier. The third stage is forced compliance at controlled prices. When ownership is restricted, price discovery disappears. The government sets the terms. Citizens are required to exchange real assets for paper claims at values determined by policy, not markets. The transaction is mandatory, but it carries the appearance of fairness. The fourth stage comes after compliance: revaluation and inflation. Once gold is centralized under government control, its price is adjusted upward, or the currency around it is expanded. This creates immediate balance sheet relief for the state, while quietly reducing the purchasing power of everyone holding paper money. This framework isn't a theory or a prediction, it's a historical observation. The same stages appear again and again, in different countries, under different names, with different justifications. And America wasn't alone. What happened in the United States was not an exception. It was part of a much larger global pattern. Throughout the 20th century, whenever governments faced serious monetary stress, gold ownership was restricted, discouraged, or outright banned. The details changed, but the logic stayed the same. In the United Kingdom, private ownership of gold bullion was restricted for decades under exchange control laws. Citizens could hold certain coins or jewelry, but not gold, as a form of financial protection. In France, authorities repeatedly limited gold ownership and movement during periods of currency instability, especially around the world wars and their aftermath. In Germany, gold was seized and controlled as the state centralized financial power during economic collapse and wartime mobilization. Australia followed a similar path. For years, citizens were required to report and often surrender gold holdings under banking regulations. In the Soviet Union, private gold ownership was prohibited entirely. All gold belonged to the state, by definition. Different systems, same outcome. The common message was clear. When governments struggle to defend their currency, gold becomes a problem. Not because gold is dangerous, but because it exposes weakness. Gold doesn't rely on trust in policy or promises. It reflects reality. When confidence in paper money erodes, gold rises, and that rise sends a signal authorities would rather control. That is why gold is tolerated during stable times and restricted during crises. It tells the truth when currencies cannot. So why did the United States finally allow gold again? In 1974, the United States finally lifted the ban on private gold ownership. After more than 40 years, Americans were once again allowed to legally own gold. To most people, this looked like a return to financial freedom, a correction of an outdated policy, a sign that the system had healed. But the timing matters. Just 3 years earlier, in 1971, President Richard Nixon closed the gold window. Foreign governments could no longer exchange United States dollars for gold. With that single decision, the dollar became a fully fiat currency. It was no longer anchored to gold in any meaningful way, and that changed everything. Once the dollar was no longer convertible into gold, gold stopped being a direct competitor to money itself. It could rise or fall in price without threatening the monetary system. The government could print dollars freely, expand debt, and manage policy without worrying about a gold drain. In that environment, allowing citizens to own gold again carried little risk. Gold was no longer a constraint. It was just another asset, priced in dollars, traded in markets the government already. In other words, gold ownership became legal again, not because it was safe, but because it was irrelevant to the system's survival. The threat had already been removed. That distinction is important. Restrictions didn't disappear because governments stopped caring about control. They disappeared because control was no longer challenged. But here's what most people misunderstand. When people imagine gold confiscation today, they picture 1933. Government agents, forced turn-ins, physical seizures, trucks collecting metal from banks and vaults. That image is powerful, but honestly, it's also outdated. The modern financial system doesn't work that way anymore. Physical gold is just too decentralized. It's held across millions of private owners, stored in homes, vaults, safety deposit boxes, and, well, jurisdictions all around the world. Trying to seize it directly would be expensive, slow, legally messy, and highly visible. It would trigger immediate backlash and, probably fail. Governments know this. So instead of taking assets by force, modern systems focus on something more effective: control. Control over access, control over movement, control over how money can be used. This isn't about brute force. It's really about leverage. In a digital, interconnected economy, you don't need trucks or agents if you can control the rails money moves on. You don't need raids if transactions can be delayed, denied, or made costly. And you don't need outright bans if compliance can be nudged through regulation, taxation, and surveillance. History shows that governments don't abandon power. They refine it. When one method becomes impractical, it's replaced with another that draws less attention and faces less resistance. That's why looking for a repeat of 1933 misses the point. The goal isn't to recreate the past. It's to achieve the same outcome under new conditions. Today, the tools are cleaner and, honestly, more effective. Modern confiscation doesn't require taking your assets away. It works by limiting what you can do with them. The result is the same, but the method is quieter and far more efficient. You don't lose ownership, you lose freedom. The first tool is reporting and punitive taxation. When transactions are heavily reported, tracked, and taxed at higher rates, certain assets become inconvenient to hold or use. Compliance rises, not because people agree, but because the cost of resisting becomes too high. The second tool is bank bail-ins. In a bail-in, a failing bank uses depositor funds to stabilize itself. This isn't theoretical, it's written into modern banking frameworks. When money is trapped inside the system during a crisis, converting it into anything else becomes difficult or impossible. The third tool is central bank digital currency, often called programmable money. Instead of cash, money exists as entries controlled by the issuer. Spending rules can be applied automatically. Certain purchases can be delayed, restricted, or discouraged without banning them outright. The fourth tool is capital controls. These limit how money moves across borders or between asset classes during periods of stress. Withdrawals are capped, transfers are delayed. Choice is narrow, not through force, but through regulation. None of these require confiscation in the traditional sense. They don't seize assets physically. They restrict behavior financially. The appearance of ownership remains, but practical control fades. And the conditions that made 1933 possible are forming again. The environment that led to drastic monetary decisions in the past didn't appear overnight. It built slowly then, all at once. And many of those same pressures are visible again today. The United States is carrying historically high levels of national debt. Deficits continue year after year, not as emergencies, but as the baseline. At the same time, interest payments on that debt are consuming a growing share of government revenue. Servicing the system is becoming as difficult as expanding it. Central banks are caught in a narrow corridor. If rates stay low, inflation erodes purchasing power and confidence weakens. If rates rise too far, debt servicing costs spike and financial stability is threatened. Every option carries risk, and none are painless. Beyond U.S. borders, there are quieter signals. Countries are exploring alternatives to dollar-based settlement systems. Trade arrangements are being restructured. Reserve strategies are shifting. These moves aren't dramatic, but they're deliberate. One signal stands out. Central banks themselves have been buying gold at some of the fastest rates seen in decades. Not as speculation, not as a headline trade, but as insurance. When the institutions that issue paper currency quietly accumulate gold, it reveals something important about trust. This doesn't mean collapse is imminent. It means confidence is fragile. And when confidence weakens, Governments prepare options. When the system breaks, governments always choose the same solution. What you've just seen isn't a forecast. It's not a prediction about dates, policies, or specific outcomes. It's pattern recognition. The same sequence of pressures has produced the same responses throughout modern financial history. When governments are overloaded with debt, they face a limited set of choices. They can cut spending and accept economic pain. They can raise taxes and risk political backlash. Or they can quietly reduce the value of the currency itself. Historically, inflation is the path most often taken. It's less visible, it spreads the cost over time, and it preserves control. This isn't about bad intentions or secret plans. It's about incentives. When systems are stressed, survival comes before stability. Control comes before comfort. And once extraordinary measures are introduced, they tend to stay. That's why this story matters. Not because it tells you what will happen next, but because it explains how decisions are made under pressure. The same tools, the same logic, the same trade-offs. Understanding this history doesn't require fear. It requires awareness. History doesn't warn us with headlines. It leaves clues in patterns, repeated again and again. Those who understand history are harder to surprise. They're slower to panic, and better prepared to think clearly when rules change quickly. This isn't fear, it's financial literacy.